Hi folks, welcome to the video. This corresponds with your set of notes that is entitled, close that out, Overview of the Constitution. So this will be your third set of notes for American government. And we are going to talk about today exactly what this sounds like. I'm going to give you a very broad overview of the Constitution. So the structure and what exactly is in our US Constitution, our governing document. So our learning objectives that you will answer at the end of this video and we will work on in class are to identify principles of government in the US Constitution. So we've talked about principles of government already: popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism. And where do we see those in our Constitution? So that is what you should be answering at the end. So let's start out here. The structure, really the big point here is that our Constitution is considered to be a living document. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but think about it like this. It is living because it can be changed, right? It is not final. We have made what are called amendments to the Constitution. Our Constitution has lasted for so many years because we can continually change and adapt the Constitution to fit all circumstances that our country faces. So it is considered to be a living document. And the Constitution begins with a preamble, and a preamble is an introduction. Just like we see with the Declaration of Independence, we see a preamble here. And this preamble of our Constitution lists the purposes of our government. So our Constitution starts off with that famous phrase, "We the people," right? Again, signifying how important the power of the people is to our Constitution. So "we the people" really is showing you popular sovereignty, because without the people, there would be no government, there would be no Constitution. So Article 1, after the preamble, we have Article 1, 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera. Article 1 outlines the legislative branch or Congress. So you're going to want to start associating those things together. So the legislative branch is Congress. And what Article 1 does is it outlines both the expressed and implied powers of Congress. So these expressed powers are powers that are actually stated for Congress to have. And one of the very, very big ones that you guys need to know is the Commerce Clause. And commerce is a fancy word for trade. So Congress, in Article 1, is given the power to regulate trade between states and between foreign countries. So it's regulating what we call interstate trade, and then trade with the US and between other countries. This is a fix from the Articles of Confederation, where the states were responsible for commerce. So now we're giving Congress that power. And, move this up here, Article 1 also outlines what is called the Necessary and Proper Clause, or the Elastic Clause, and this is that implied power. So it's not expressed, it's not directly stated, but this clause allows Congress to make other laws that are necessary for it to carry out its other powers. And that's very broad. It doesn't list anything specific, but what this does is it says, look, we know Congress is probably going to have to make laws that are not listed here. We can't list all of them. So let's add this one at the end and say, if it's necessary to carry out its other powers, Congress can make a law to do it. Okay. Article 2 outlines the requirements of the office of the president and what role the executive plays. So we're actually going to spend a unit talking about really each of these articles. We'll look at Congress, we'll look at the president, and we will look at the judicial branch. And that judicial branch then is outlined in Article 3. So that's going to define the judicial branch and will establish the Supreme Court. So you should start associating those things in your head: legislative branch, Congress; executive branch, President; judicial branch, Supreme Court. Okay. So for your notes, there is a section that I do want to make sure that you guys get. So when we're looking at Articles 1 through 3, okay, it's outlining the requirements, the responsibilities, and the limits of each major branch of government. So when we're thinking about our principles, it's important for you guys to remember that these 3 articles are dealing with 2 of our principles of government. It's dealing with 1, separation of powers, right? Because it's outlining exactly what the branches do. And 2, it outlines checks and balances, because it also places limits or restrictions on each branch, right? So the executive branch, for instance, has powers over the judicial branch and the legislative branch. So Articles 1 through 3 represent separation of powers and checks and balances. Article 4 defines the relationship between the states. And remember, this was something that was contested or debated under the Articles of Confederation. So privileges and immunities. Basically what that means is you cannot be discriminated by a state that you don't live in, for example. Like if you cross state lines, you are given the same privileges and rights as any other state. And Article 4 also outlines something called the full faith and credit clause. And this is the requirement that each state has to accept the public acts, the records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. So the best example that I like to give here is my marriage and the license that we had to get. My husband and I, we live in Ohio, but we got married in Kentucky. Okay, my marriage license says Kentucky on it. Now, that does not mean that I'm only married in Kentucky, right? That would be ridiculous. So all of the states, all 50 states, accept the legality of my marriage because it's still a legitimate document, okay? So just because it says one state, all of the states have to accept that as legitimate. Okay, and I just gave you that example. So my marriage license, think of your driver's license too, right? Your driver's license is valid everywhere, not just Ohio. So that would be an example of the full faith and credit clause. Article 5 outlines the amendment process, which we talked about in the last video. So how can we make sure that the Constitution stays up to date and living, right? Making sure that it's that living document to adapt to what we need it to. And then Article 6 establishes national supremacy. And it does that through a very short clause called the Supremacy Clause. And this makes the Constitution, federal laws, and national treaties supreme over state laws. So state laws are now subordinate or under. So if there is conflict between the national government and the state government and the laws that they've made, the national government will always come out on top. Okay, that's what it means to have supremacy. So when we're thinking about Articles 4, 5, and 6, right? 4 deals with the relationship between states. We've got the amendment process, which deals with both the national and state governments, and national supremacy. Okay, the major principle of government that we're talking about here is going to be federalism. So make sure that you get that on your notes. So federalism, right? The relationship between the national government and the state governments, the different powers that they have. That is federalism. Okay. Article 7 is the ratification process. And in order to ratify the Constitution, ratify means approve. 9 out of the 13 states were required to pass the Constitution in order for it to become law. After Article 7, we have the Bill of Rights, which we'll talk about in the next video. But the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And these spell out specific rights and liberties that you have that the government cannot take away. And then at the end of the document, we have tacked on amendments 11 through 27. So the amendments are the changes that are made to the Constitution. And we will spend next unit looking at what these amendments actually are, what changes they have made to the Constitution, and how they've addressed historical movements. Okay. So remember, your learning objectives for this video were to, one, identify principles of government in the US Constitution. So make sure that you have filled in the entire note sheet. If you have questions, make sure to ask me in class. Answer that question in Edpuzzle, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.